we're talking about procurement fraud. Dave, take us through the basics. What is procurement fraud?
Well, procurement fraud is probably one of the hardest frauds to find and incredibly easy to set up. So let's just say that you're buying a chair for your company, and the chair is going to cost $100. So you go up to your local store and you say to them, listen, rather than charging me $100 for the chair, do me a favor and charge me $120 for the chair. I'll get the company to pay the $120, and then you pay me $10, and I keep the other 10, and you keep the other $10. So we both do well out of it, and it's only the company that gets affected at the end of the day. So it's really not that important. And that is the very, very basics of how procurement fraud works.
Okay, so what red flags suggest that a vendor relationship might be suspicious?
There are a whole lot of red flags. The first one is when vendors seem to be getting too close to the buyers. So, for instance, they're always going to hockey games or football games, or they're taking them across to watch the Olympics or whatever it happens to be. You know, these rather large, extravagant, they going out to lunch on a regular basis together. They've become house friends. All of these are red flags. The other red flags are, what are the costs of actually doing, of what we are actually buying? Now, we all know the story about the $100 pencil, where it was found in the military that one pencil, one HB pencil, which would cost 10 cents at a local store, was costing $100 for the military to buy. And that was just because of procurement fraud. Now, pencils are one thing, but you can imagine how quickly some other things can add up. We had a client who was importing carpets into Canada, and all they were doing is they were routing it through a company with a similar name to the overseas company, and then adding 20% and selling it on to the company in Canada. So the procurement manager was actually making 20% profit on everything that was delivered. That turned out to be a huge sum at the end of the day. But the other thing is, it's not always about money. It can be about other things. It can be about getting a position of power. It can be sex. That somebody will turn around and say, if you buy this from me at this price, then I'll make you happy. And if that happens, then you're caught up in a procurement fraud. No money is changing hands. We had a guy who was locked away who never took a cent from the procurement vendors. It was against his morals to take money from the procurement person. What wasn't against his morals was having the procurement company, the vendor company, come into his house and fix his water geyser, put in a new swimming pool for him, put in a new sauna for him, pave his driveway. All of these he considered to be acceptable. So in his mind, he wasn't stealing from the company because they weren't paying him any money. He simply was they were giving him helping benefits that he kept track of the amount that each of them owed him. And at the end of the day, he ended up spending 2.5 years in prison. So the judge didn't believe that he was innocent either. I think one of the more interesting cases is the case called Agrium. And this is where two employees of Agrium went out to buy potash from the Congo. And what happened is they arranged a deal. They were going to start a potash company. Canada has potash, so they were going to start a mine in Canada. And this was a short-term deal in order as a bridging between them starting the mine in Canada and what they needed to get in to produce for the contracts that they had. Well, things were delayed in starting the contract in Canada, so two gentlemen were appointed to go and renegotiate the contract. And in what became known as the Chicago Amendment, they talked up the price by $2 a ton. Now, they were importing $200,000 a ton every year. So $2 a ton was a significant amount of money. Nobody at the company thought twice about this. They were quite happy with it, and they continued to buy the stock at the higher value. The two negotiators were making a lot of money, and everybody was happy until they weren't. And when it was found out that these guys were getting a backhander, the company then tried to claim on their insurance for for theft. And the only money they managed to recover or recoup was the amount that was actually paid in bribe to these two gentlemen. They weren't able to recover the full amount that they'd lost because the insurance company said, you accepted the purchase of this product at this price, you sold it, you made a profit on it, and therefore we're not going to give you a super profit for these guys ripping you off. And this is how difficult it is in this situation to actually prosecute procurement fraud and to make an insurance claim against the company for it.
Okay, so maybe you could also just unpack for us why segregation of duties is so important in procurement. I mean, maybe this is something that would have mitigated something like that?
Well, segregation of duties means that one person is involved in making the purchase decision where another one is responsible for receiving the goods, another one is responsible for paying for them. And so the hope is that between the three of them, if one of them has been a rip-off artist, they'll get caught. Unfortunately, often it's a procurement person who still is working on his own, negotiating the prices and everything else. The product's delivered, the person who's receiving the goods is getting them. The contracts are made out for the amount, so the person who's paying them knows what they're paying. So it really is only it's only the procurement manager who knows that there's a fraud going on. And the only way of sorting that out is on a yearly or every 5 years to change your procurement teams around so that you don't have the same clients all the time. But that comes with significant risk as well, because a lot of these procurement contracts are set up because of personal relations that have been developed over a long period of time, and that there's trust between the buyer and the vendor. And so, none of it's easy.
I mean, trust is a currency in itself.
It is. It's very much so. And this is why it's so difficult to, just turn around and say, right, we're going to change up our procurement team.
What about phantom vendors, shell companies? How do those play a role?
Well, phantom companies are just what they say. They're phantom. They don't exist. And so there's two ways that a phantom company can work. One is it's purely phantom. So we buy product from a company which is never delivered. It never appears, it never comes through the door, it just disappears into the ether. And you'll often find phantom companies where there's, for instance, a construction job, and there'll be two painters on the job, but one of them will be phantom and the other one will be real. And they'll both be charging, but the painting's only effectively done by the one company. The other type of phantom company is the company which is owned by a third party or owned by one of the people, and it's actually not doing any of the work that it's charging out for and being signed off by the person. We've had a couple of really interesting examples of this type of fraud where people were buying stock to fix up from the major box stores, and they were never even getting the stock. They were just invoicing the box stores with a fictitious invoice number and getting paid for it. And we're not talking 100 or 200,000, we're talking millions of dollars.
There's multiple types of invoice fraud, right? I mean, can you unpack that?
Well, there are. I mean, the most basic invoice fraud is to just never send the goods and invoice for them. The second one is to invoice for the goods this month and then invoice for the same goods again next month. And then the next month and the next month. I did a job where we had a look at pharmacies claiming against medical schemes. And the most we had of one script being claimed from a medical scheme was 8 times. And all of them were paid. So there's that side. There's over-invoicing. So you order 100 product, on the invoice you put down that 110 were delivered. What we're hoping there is that you're going to have some lazy guy sitting and receiving who's just going to sign off because, yeah, there the product is over in the corner. Thank you very much. Paid. There's getting quantities. There's pricing wrong. So we might have a contract that says that we will charge $1.50 for a widget. But instead of charging $1.50, we charge $1.55. And we just see if we get away with it. And it's all of these things that form part of invoicing fraud. And then there's invoicing fraud which doesn't even involve the customer. So what happens is the company needing to make the sales target or something like that might just run a couple of invoices through their books because they had a bad month so that they make their targets and then they reverse it at the beginning of the next month. And what that shows is it shows that the company is doing well because their sales are where they should be, but in reality their sales are well lower than that. So there are hundreds of ways of invoicing fraud to happen. We were involved in a test with a company many years ago now, where we overpaid a bunch of invoices on purpose to see what actually transpired at the vendors. And we overpaid 50 vendors a couple of $100. And what happened is, of the vendors that we overpaid, about 10 of them came back to us and said, hey guys, you've overpaid us. What do you want us to do with the money? But 40 of them turned around and hid the money. And in fact, 10 of them, when we said that we'd overpaid them, actually turned around and flatly denied that we'd overpaid them.
Wow.
So it just goes to show how people You think that, oh, well, if I double pay an invoice, the person on the other side is going to come back and say, sorry, mate, you've paid this invoice twice. What would you like us to do with it? A lot of companies will turn around and say, you paid the invoice twice. Let's see what happens. We're just going to park it away quietly. And if you don't come and look for your money, we're not going to tell you about it.
So what was the ramification for the companies that either said they weren't going to give you money back or didn't even notice? Was it like, well, we're not going to work with those guys because they're clearly not transparent?
Well, there would have been that ramification apart from there were so many clients that did it. So what it did show to the company is that you've got to be super careful about the amount of money that you pay out.
So interesting. I mean, with that being said, what can procurement audits, in your professional opinion, reveal?
Well, procurement audits can reveal where there's significant problems. When you're running a set of product through purchasing, is somebody checking to see that the prices are relatively normal to the rest of the industry? So are we looking at how many different how many quotes were received for something? If it's a sole source procurement, why was it sole sourced? If it's gone out to tender, are the three companies that replied to the tender actually independent of one another, or are they simply the one and the same? And that really is the essence of a procurement audit, is to work out that A, none of your employees are part of a company that you don't know about. B, that the people that you're talking to you do actually know. Well, again, just one of the things in a procurement audit which is important is who are you actually dealing with? A lot of companies buy from a middleman and don't even know that they're buying from a middleman. So you might be buying shoes thinking that they're made in the United Kingdom, and at the end of the day, they've been made in a sweatshop in Thailand by 6-year-olds. There's a whole host of things which can come from the trade war that we're looking at the moment. The first and most obvious is what they call country labeling. So let's say a product's made in China at 145% tariff. What happens is it's bought in England at there's zero trading agreement tariff between England and China. So the products come into England for no tariff. They then relabeled with made in the UK on them, and the made in China sticker is taken off, and the products are shipped as made in UK to America and only attract a 10% tariff, thereby skirting the 145% tariff. The second thing is if the tariffs continue, what you will see is stuff like you're seeing in the pop culture TikTok videos, that the manufacturers are going to turn around and say, we've got all of the stock left over because, St. Ralph Lauren can't import anymore because of the 145% tariff. So what we're going to do is we're going to offer it for sale at our our margin cost, and maybe even making a loss on it. And what that does is it indirectly really stuffs up the market for all of these high-end products in the US. Because all of a sudden people will be importing a bag at $20, paying the $25 in duty, so we're now up to $45, and they're getting a bag which, if they had to go into their local mall, would cost them $3,000.
internal controls are the most effective against procurement fraud?
The first is to monitor what your procurement people are doing the whole time. And it really isn't looking over their shoulder, but it's just making sure that everything is above board. So the onboarding process has to be squeaky clean. If you're going out and you're getting a set of quotes, who are you getting quotes from? Which newspapers are you advertising in order to get a quote? And who are you approaching? Are you approaching 10 producers and saying, we want a quote on ABC? Or are you going to your one local vendor and saying to him, look, I need 3 quotes, go out and get them? I mean, we've all had a car crash. We've gone along to the panel beater and he says, how many quotes do you need for insurance? And you say, well, I need 3 quotes. And he says, great, I'll have 3 quotes for you in the morning. And when you come in the morning, there's 3 quotes from 3 different companies. And hoorah, the guy that you took your car to is 10% lower than the other 2. And how does that work? Well, you've got 3 panel beaters who are in cahoots or more, but let's say 3 panel beaters in cahoots, and they each give each other a set of invoice books, quote books, and they say, right, if a client comes through, you quote on it properly, and then add 10%, put it onto our quotes, so the insurance company will think that your quote is acceptable.
So if you get caught out for that, who actually gets in trouble? Do you get in trouble as the consumer, or is it the panel beaters who colluded? I mean, unless they can prove that you got the panel beats to give other quotes. I mean, do they even investigate that kind of thing?
It's not even really investigated, to be honest with you. And where would the problem be at the end of the day? It would probably be with the panel beater if they could prove that he did actually set up the other 2 quotes.
Interesting.
But it is why a lot of insurance companies have moved towards having in-house service repair centers rather than using other panel beaters, because they know that what they're getting is going to be a lot cheaper than going through.
Dave, talking about emergencies and car crashes, how can fraudsters use emergencies or no-bid procurement processes to their advantage, or abuse it?
Well, quite often what you find with a company is that there'll be a justification for sole source procurement because of an emergency. So we need to get ABC product in now, in the next couple of weeks. So we're not going to go out to tender. We're going to go to Joe and we're going to buy it from Joe because we know he can deliver. And generally that's done purely so that you can bypass the controls within the tendering process. And normally at the end of the day, there's some sort of fraud involved.
So I know that this is just one discussion. We talk about procurement fraud all the time. We're going to continue talking about procurement fraud, telling stories, because I think the more people know, the better informed that they will be. If you suspect something happening in your organization, what do you do?
Well, the first is to reach out and to either your audit committee or your whistleblowing hotline if your company has. If your company doesn't have any of that, it's to go to your CEO or CFO and tell them of your concerns. And then obviously from the company point of view, when something has been brought up, or if the management's not convinced that everything's okay, is to go out and employ a professional, like for instance Restitution, in order to sort out the problem and to make sure that there's no fraud going on.
Okay, so now how long does a process like that take? If forensic restitution comes in, You do a little bit of an audit. Is it a long process? Is it a short process?
That's a little bit like asking how long is a piece of string. The basics of a procurement audit are all going to be the same for each company, but they're going to change very quickly depending on what's found on the way through. So you might start reviewing emails and you might see a connection between your procurement man and one of the purchasers on the far side. And then you're starting to have to chase down those rabbit holes in order to find out what's actually happening. It's a process. That's all I can say.